I'm Valeria Rosati, and I'm a senior partner at Vantage Infrastructure. We are an independent specialist infrastructure manager focused on sustainable solutions for debt and equity. Interesting question, what matters most in ESG integration? I would say that a critical yet often neglected component is the asset management phase. A few years ago, we were designing our own integration approach and in fact looked at the options available in the marketplace. It would be fair to say that most managers that integrate ESG do that at the asset selection stage and in due diligence, but then post-acquisition they disregard this area as if somehow ESG was managing itself on autopilot or could be delegated fully to the management team of the portfolio companies. Now, we certainly disagree with that view because infrastructure investments are made in the long term and require constant and consistent attention in all areas, including ESG. So we took this idea and turned it on its head and formulated an active ESG integration approach that put precisely the asset management phase and the existing portfolio companies at the heart of it. We're looking at the actions that could be taken in the day-to-day from an ESG perspective to maximize value, minimize risks, and also deliver impacts. So the approach that was formulated and the tools that were created were then first tested and then rolled out across the existing assets and then provided a great springboard for integration across the entire investment lifecycle. That is not to say the management team of portfolio companies don't play a critical role in delivery of ESG projects. They absolutely do, but it is a partnership effort. If we take, for instance, climate risks and the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, our role as a manager was to identify it early, to formulate an early approach for its assessment, to encourage the adoption by the portfolio companies and formally support it ourselves, and create an alignment with the portfolio companies. But after that, it has become a true partnership effort between ourselves and the management teams in terms of the implementation and its delivery.
I'm Lisa Shaw, and I'm responsible for debt asset management at Vantage Infrastructure. It can be tempting to think of ESG and debt as a more passive exercise, but at Vantage, we disagree. Of course, debt and equity are inherently different. Once a debt investment has been made and we're into the asset management phase, there can be no return upside. So first and foremost, we're managing the downside risk. Secondly, lenders have less control and influence than with an ownership stake, but this doesn't mean they can't still take an active approach to ESG. It is vital that any risk is identified, analysed and managed effectively. So how can they do this? Both assessment and engagement are key, and as with equity, should occur right through the life cycle of a transaction. Systemizing these processes such that ESG assessments and issuer engagement occur consistently through from the initial screening stage of a potential investment to regular reviews during the asset management phase allows for effective risk and return optimization prior to investment and effective risk management thereafter. This is particularly of value for infrastructure debt investors given their long-term investment exposure. We believe that regular ESG assessments should be as fundamental as regular credit analysis given the rapid developments we're seeing in macro trends such as the low carbon energy transition.
On the equity side, we see new trends in ESG emerge all the time. To mention two, the first one would probably be benchmarking and transfer of best practice. The growth in popularity of the GRESB infrastructure assessment only demonstrates something that we've been a believer of for some time, that in order to know what great looks like in ESG and to be ambitious, you have to benchmark yourself. So we started working before everybody was doing it on the GRESB infrastructure surveys with our portfolio companies, taking it really seriously. And we think it's also very important that every year active asset managers look at the results meticulously, formulate action plans, agree them with management teams, embed them in the management team's remuneration structure with KPIs, and also importantly that they leverage as much as possible the transfer of best practice between different portfolio companies on areas of ESG. The second trend would be social factors. I've talked before about climate-related risks and net zero as an important continuing trend, but with the pandemic still not at bay, the penny in the last 12 months has really dropped on social factors and their importance. Before, they were relegated by many as a mere tick-in-the-box exercise, and they've now been recognized as potentially very material value drivers. And in fact, most of the time and the effort in the last 12 months has been dedicated on the management of vulnerability, customer protection, stakeholder engagement, community support, employee welfare and safety. So the focus has really shifted from whether they are important onto how to assess them and quantify them.
It's a virtuous circle. Typically, when lenders care, sponsors do too, and this combined focus is making it easier to assess and manage ESG. Take data availability, for instance. Without good information, effective risk identification and analysis is impossible. Yet, infrastructure debt lenders will invariably cite their inability to obtain consistent data as their biggest ESG challenge. We think we're beginning to see this change. For instance, on a recent US midstream transaction, we were encouraged that sponsors were willing to appoint an ESG advisor to help establish an ESG strategy and reporting process for the asset. This type of transparency was much harder to achieve just a year ago, particularly in a sector like the US midstream. Likewise, lenders' ability to manage ESG is improving. Working with sponsors who are willing to take a constructive and proactive approach to managing ESG concerns means that we see an increasing willingness to incorporate covenants within loan documents. We closed a European heating transaction where sponsors committed to a decarbonisation strategy and regular reporting on the implementation of this. It's these developments that illustrate why we consider continued analysis throughout the full life cycle to be so important. ESG trends and analysis are developing rapidly, and without a culture of continued review and improvement, both in relation to the risks facing assets and to own internal processes, we believe that neither debt nor equity investors are adequately managing ESG risk.